Well, we are live once again. Good evening out there in YouTube land and on Facebook Live. It's a pleasure to be here and be joined by the one, the only, the legend of Recording Studio RockStars, Mr. Lij Shaw.
Guys, it's an absolute pleasure to be here. I feel massively honored to be hanging out with you guys.
Oh, mate, it's just like another big love in at NAMM, which, you know, we'll get to these sort of things later. But Lij, you're joining us from... Oh, mate, it's just like another big love in there it is.
It's such a working. Like, we can't even show up just once. We got to show up twice. And
we do this every week.
We do, and every week I end up turning this down. It's just to make sure it's working. Lij, you're joining us from East Nashville.
East Nashville, yeah. So I like to think of... this is, you know, or I like to think of that place that they call Brooklyn as the East Nashville of Manhattan. That's the way I like to spin it. So, you know, we're just across the river, and we sort of like to take ownership of our little cool world here of artists and musicians and stuff like that. Awesome
stuff. So many of our viewers will know you hopefully from Recording Studio RockStars, but we met, is it 2 or 3 NAMMs ago?
I think so. Yeah, I think we did meet at at the NAMMs, probably Winter NAMM. Maybe it was Summer NAMM, but it was.
I've only ever been to Winter, but we had a plan to come to Summer NAMM this year, but you know, again, that was curtailed slightly. But I'm sure we've met, probably hanging out at the media center trying to get good internet.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, it's like dying. You know, you're looking for a coffee and trying to keep standing at that point, you know. Just glad to have a little place to like settle down for a minute and take a break.
Yeah. Try not to get too comfy in the corner of the sofa, just to not pass out or sleep a bit. So Lij, alongside Recording Studio RockStars, which I guess came off the back of this, you are the owner, proprietor, and top dog at the Toy Box Studio.
Yeah, so that's where I'm sitting right now. That's what you see right behind me. The Toy Box is my home studio, and you know, it started out just like anybody's, just up in the house in my bedroom, you know, a pair of speakers and just kind of in a corner, and then it evolved, and ultimately it made its way down to the garage here across my property, and that's where I am now.
Awesome. But from looking at the site and looking at the video that you did with,
it was a Joe Gilder, the studio tour.
Yeah, the studio tour. It's some garage or garage, should I say? It's
exactly.
Stunning. I mean, you've got double height space, and I bet drums sound amazing in there.
They do sound pretty awesome. You know, what I did was we actually used the loft space there, you know, in the roof structure. We built the control room, and then I decided to make that space above it. So it was like an extension of the live room. So the live room's pretty, you know, it's not that wide across. It's about the same as my control room. You know, it's like maybe 10 feet, 11 feet across or something like that. I think the control room's actually wider than the live space is. So then you're like, well, what do I do? I mean, do you make it super dead? But if you want to open it up, you know, and you can get access to that attic space, you can actually kind of double the size of the room. And I had seen Carl Tatz do that in another studio here, and I thought that was pretty clever. So I just put in spiral stairs that just go right up to the little loft area.
It does look very cool. Yeah, it looks very, very nice. And you've got, well, Dave Grohl thinks he's got a desk with some names and some legendary status behind it. The MCI console you've got, I think, would give his a run for its money for the number of singles that have been sold off the back of a console, you know, recordings made on a console. So
yeah.
Just tell it. How did you come across the desk that, you know, the name that came up in my, the one I stopped at was the desk that was used to record Hotel California.
Hold on, and Staying Alive. Let's get.
And Saturday Night Fever.
How on earth did you come across that console and acquire it?
So the funny thing is, I came across it the same way that we all come across stuff. I was just making a record with the band, and we're just in all our free minutes. I guess it was a little bit before, you know, everybody's looking at Instagram and Facebook, but we used to just look at eBay, and you just search vintage gear, and then you just see what pops up. And up pops this console that was self-described as a famous MCI console. and they had these cool pictures of it, and they were making it for sale on eBay. And I think I made an offer for it then, but ultimately it actually didn't sell. Like, they didn't get the offer and they didn't do the sale, but I got a hold of their email, and I decided that I just set my sights on this thing. And I was like, I gotta have this board. And I started bugging these guys for like a year, just call them every time I got a break. I was like, hey, what do you think about selling that console? You know? And what it is it's a custom built MCI board that Jeep Harned built for Criteria Studios in Miami back in 1969. He was commissioned for, I think, $50,000 at the time to build a console, which he built in a garage or a warehouse space. And then they moved it into the studio. And it has 20 mic pre's on one side, and it has 24 faders on the other side. And it's, you know, what you'd call a split studio or a split console design. And it's the same board. It was in Criteria for a decade of the 70s, you know, the height of vinyl record making, you know, the height of the record industry, essentially. I mean, I don't know if we still think of that as really even bigger than where it got to later. But while it was there, it won 2 Grammys. It did the Hotel California for the Eagles. It did Staying Alive and Saturday Night Fever for the Bee Gees. Recorded Average White Band, Crosby, Stills and Nash, Eric Clapton, 461 Ocean Boulevard. So I Shot the Sheriff was done on this board. His version of it, you know. It even did the soundtrack to the movie Grease, and did Do You Think I'm Sexy for Rod Stewart. How's that right there? So it's just like a long list of stuff. It even recorded Margaritaville was cut on this.
Right. Very, very cool.
Anyway, so I ended up acquiring it, and I put it into the studio, and I've been recording with it for about 13 years now. And it's a lot of fun. It's very cool. It's very, you know, I don't know how much you guys talk about that. Like, how do you combine the new world of doing a studio with the old vintage world? But it's a lot of fun to do that combination. It can also be very tricky.
Joe, it's funny. I was about to say, because you have definitely embraced, I'd say, again, from the studio tour, and I would say to anyone, check out Lij on YouTube, and you can find the studio tour that he did. But I can see you've got tape one side and Pro Tools, or effectively analog one side and digital the other, which is a really cool way of working. But you also mentioned, you know, with the demise of being able to actually get hold of tape, I know certainly in the UK, it's a challenge. Getting hold of the actual raw tape is a challenge. And when you can, it's expensive.
Yeah, indeed. So one of the ways I actually solved that was just simply to take a couple of really good reels of tape and use them over and over and over again. In fact, I've probably been using the same 2 reels of tape for a decade. And I got them when I was doing a project. I was producing a band that went to go work with Steve Albini up at Electrical Studios. And so, you know, they were on a label and they had a budget to buy plenty of reels of tape. But once we recorded on tape, we transferred everything over into Pro Tools and then just kept working on the record at that point. And later, as we continued working on things, and, you know, maybe we were trying to do a project together and the band didn't necessarily have a money budget for certain things we were doing, they did have this great tape supply. And I was like, well, let's just do a tape trade on some stuff. So I actually did sessions and acquired reels of Bassett 900 that came from Steve Albini. And this was like his select choice of tape to be using for the sessions. And so I just took my favorite reels of that and had enough to do, you know, to do a whole record on it if I wanted. But what I found was, for me, the easiest way to sort of integrate the new and the old is to record to the tape and then immediately transfer it into Pro Tools. And then you can just rewind the tape and use it again. And I think one of the questions that comes up is, well, how many times can you do that? You know, does new tape sound better than old tape and all that kind of stuff? And so when I had Steve Albini's here, I just asked him that. And I remember at one point he told me, he said, like, well, I don't know, I guess it, you know, be the substrate of the tape, if it could hold up, you know, being used on the machine, I suppose you could probably go about 1,000 times on it. I was like, great, done deal.
Result, yeah.
What is that before it degrades? 1,000 times before?
Yeah, I think he was sort of imagining that the plastic would sort of come undone if you're playing it, and recording on it 1,000 times on the machine. But, I don't think anybody did the test on that. It maybe 3M did at one point, and Bassif and stuff.
Wow.
But it sounded great. And a lot of the times when I'm doing tape, you're always going for sort of a vibe and a sound, which you get. And I don't know, it just works really great. It sounds cool. I think that it would be nice to put a fresh reel on and listen to that too. See how I do a comparison. But I mean, like you said, tape's expensive. And so, you have to ask yourself the question, like, what's the balancing act of getting a cool old school sound, but keeping it in the band's budget and figuring out a way to make this work and not turn it into, an obstacle for making a record.
I remember one of the first paid sessions that I ever did as quote unquote producer stroke engineer. It was a classical string trio, so piano, cello, and violin. And they were absolutely adamant they wanted to record to tape because they said, I mean, this is going back 20 something years now when digital wasn't as refined as it is now. But we also did a recording to, we had a pair of Akai DR16s in the studio. This is going back, how far back it is. We had a pair of DR16s and we recorded to tape and to DR16 simultaneously. And I remember everyone saying, wow, isn't there a lot of top end in the digital? And I was saying, yeah, that could be because the tape's been around about 3 times. And,
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I mean, you talk about like how digital's come such a long way, and I don't know that people who are just coming into it now, you just take it for granted. It's like, digital, it's digital. It does what it does. You have a DAW on your computer, and it does, and you have 50 million plugins, and you've got virtual instruments and all this stuff. It took us a minute to get there. I mean, we didn't have all that stuff. These were just dreams, Yeah. The dream of the 90s, as they say in Portlandia in that episode. It was like in the 90s, there was this promise of digital, but we were still using all the old technology. And then, this stuff would come along in little bits and some promise would be made, like auto-tune, that came along in like 96 or something like that, 97.
Yeah.
And we were still trying to figure out how to use a sequencer and Pro Tools at the same time because Pro Tools didn't have MIDI in it. And it was all about like, you like, oh, I was at so-and-so studio and they had Logic open and Pro Tools at the same time. And they had figured out how to connect them so that they chased each other. And that was sort of blow your mind. But it was a lot of fun making records that way too. And the funny thing is, even with the limitations of sound and the limitations of the way that digital sounded back then, I know you guys, just like me, we can go back and find an old record for that time and then listen to it and go like, but damn, that sounds great. Like, what did I do? How come I had it figured out and it sounded so cool back then?
Yeah.
But, and say one of the things that I know you like to do, and say one of the reasons I work doing this stuff is actually putting bands in rooms and saying, right, go. Because to me, that's how we should be doing it. It's great that we can build music up track by track, and obviously, that's the way it is done a lot of the time now. We all work that way, but there is something to be said for putting a group of people in a room, and saying, right, 3 or 1, 2, 3, 4, go. Some magic happens.
Yeah, except that most people, a lot of times, you put people in a room and they go like, 1, 2, 3, 4, go. You're like, oh, that's not how a count off works. No, I agree with you. I love working with people in a room and recording music that way, because that is how the magic happens. For me, as a musician, that's how I got into this stuff. And I do think that sometimes that makes a difference. Like if you get into this because you come from a background of playing an instrument, then you appreciate how much fun it is to play with other people. And so that you appreciate that. Actually, speaking of which, even just being on live stream, we'll give a shout out to a couple of people. We got Marcus here and Larry. Shout out to you guys for being here, Daniel, and more people jumping on. But thanks for joining us. my favorite thing is to mic up a band. I think there's a sound that you get when you've got microphones, bleeding into each other and done in the right way, and the band playing together as a whole, that can sound more exciting and powerful to me than when things are perfectly lined up and built one step at a time and you try and replicate that,
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. The best results I've had in here, I mean, and say anyone who has seen my studio will know it's tiny. I've had Paul, Dan, and myself all playing simultaneously on stuff. We've gone, whoa, it's compact in here. I've had 8 people in here playing simultaneously.
That's awesome, dude. I bet it sounded good.
It sounded amazing, but I had 4 of them out on the deck outside on headphones. So we had
that was the horn section, right?
No, fortunately, 2 keyboards and guitar and bass out on the deck. They thought it was the best studio session ever because the phrase "studio tan" meant something.
Exactly.
Because it was a beautiful sunny day. They were all outside sunning themselves and playing, and we were all sweating our body parts off in here. But it was amazing because you get that vibe, and that's what a studio I think is about—a cool vibe.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I like to think of tracking. So tracking sessions are probably my most favorite time in the studio. There's this thing that happens. There's this like intense energy to get ready for a tracking session. I guess if you work in a place where everything's already set up all the time, it's a little different. But for me, it's always like you're building a machine. You're trying to get everything working just right. You got everything mic'd up. You got all your sounds where you want them and your levels set. You get your headphones. And then the band starts playing, and then there's a funny shift of energy because as the engineer, you spent all like hours getting everything ready, and it's very intensive. And then the band goes, and then you just kind of like, it's exciting, but you also just like, it's like an exhale. And now you're just
it's
sitting.
Almost like my work is done.
Yeah,
it's almost like my work is done. All I have to do now is these 2 and use my ears.
Yeah, except you have to do what happens is that is the danger moment because as the engineer, you can start sort of get lulled into complacency and you can snooze a little. And that's the moment where you miss the fact that, oh crap, the hi-hat mic went out and I didn't notice it or something like that. So you kind of have to stay on your toes, even though you're just chilling in a chair listening.
So you kind of mentioned it a little bit, that you were in what you were going to refer to as a home studio. Now, we on this side of the pond don't have some of the legal restrictions that you up until recently have had in the home studio world. And at this point, doth cap much congratulations on fighting the good fight and winning.
Well, how long has it been?
Thank you, guys.
How long?
I spent 5 years. So
can you give us a little bit of the backstory? Because obviously we don't really know. We don't really know what it's all about because obviously from our side of things, we don't have the same restrictions.
Yeah, so sometimes it's tricky to do a 5-year synopsis very quickly, but I'll do my best. So 91, I moved to Nashville to go to recording school. Do that, graduate, start working in studios. So through the 90s, I'm working in studios in Nashville. I see, I'm a big fan of alternative music and independent music. So I liked that kind of DIY mentality. I liked, the smaller label bands that were touring and hustling. And I liked the fact that those bands tended to make records in home studios. So I just, and the home studio itself was starting to really appear on the scene. Now it's ubiquitous, but then it was sort of a new thing on a certain level. And the ability to have your own home studio became a real reality by about 2000. So during that time, I saw and worked at a number of home studios all through Nashville. The message was really clear to me. Hey, doing a home studio, that's a cool thing to do. If you want to do it, go for it. Everybody's doing it. So I shopped around. I found a realtor, bought a house in East Nashville, 100% with the intention of putting a home studio in it and working up in the house. And then one day down the road, putting it in the garage. Even my realtor found me a place with a garage for that idea. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to us and anybody else that I know, in 1998, the city slipped through this bylaw that said, oh, you're now no longer allowed to you can work at home, but you can't have a customer come to your house. So the city snuck in this law in 98 that basically made all home recording studios in Nashville illegal if they had a customer come over to the house.
In the most, city in the city that records probably the most music in the whole world.
Yeah, Music City. It literally, if you arrive here, there's probably a billboard on all sides that just says "Welcome to Music City." So that happened, and nobody really knew about it. And I bought my house, and then I did my studio in the garage, and I got excited about it. Opened the doors to my studio down here, the one I'm sitting in right now, in 2007, and worked out of it for a decade. Like, I was making records, building website, doing all the stuff you would normally do. I was acting like any other home studio. So, if I was working with a band, we were respectful of the neighbors. We tried not to be loud. It's soundproofed, all that kind of stuff. And I didn't have a sign out front or anything like that. I understood that, there's a difference between residential and commercial. You can't have like a storefront if you're residential. I guess it depends on where you're living. Everybody has different rules about it. But there was sort of a common sense element to it, And then in 2015, I walked up to my mailbox and I opened it up, and there's a letter from City Codes, and it says, cease and desist operating the Toy Box Studio, a commercial studio in a residential zone. And I was like, what? So, in all transparency, at that point, I had heard about it because it had popped up on social media in 2011. Years after I'd started my studio and been working in it, there was this proposal for a home studio bill where they were trying to legalize it, and many of us in Nashville, for the first time ever, were like, we didn't even know it wasn't allowed. So 2015 comes along. I get a cease and desist letter. Freaked out, talked to the press, didn't sleep for a week, ultimately ended up connecting with a legal team who came along and advised me. So I got contacted by the Institute for Justice and the Beacon Center. Institute for Justice is a national group. The Beacon Center is right here in Tennessee, in Nashville. And they both said, look, we specialize in this kind of thing. We think you're a perfect example of the kind of fight we're trying to help, and so we want to work with you. Do you want to do it? And I was like, it's a little scary, this idea, because they're talking about taking on the city and everything. And it was very, I think a first instinct was like put my tail between my legs, like, oh no, I'm a bad dog. I must have done something wrong, And so then I talked to him. I was like, if you guys are great at what you do and you're great at what you do, why don't we team up and we'll do this together? And so I ended up with this incredible legal team that I like to refer to as the League of Justice. And we took on the city. We were just like, you know what, we're going to take on the city head on. And that was 5 years ago. And so for the last 5 years, I've been in this process of fighting City Hall and trying to make a change. The goal was to make a change for everybody. But the immediate goal was like, how do I defend my own rights to be able to run my studio since they've singled me out? And so that took us through a process of applying for a rezoning for my house. And that took a whole year. Probably they must have spent at least $20,000 or more just going through that process and through the Metro Council system, hiring a local attorney. And I had to petition the neighborhood and get 40 signatures from my immediate neighbors saying, yeah, no problem with us and all this stuff. Mm-hmm. And then ultimately it didn't pass because the Metro Council had to vote on it and they voted no. So that got shot down. And then we filed a lawsuit. And so then we went through another 2 years through the legal system and sued the city. And it was essentially in my defense of my constitutional right to be able to work from home. And also a co-plaintiff, a woman named Pat Rayner, who's she's older and she's a hairstylist, and she just wanted to be able to support herself in her old age by continuing to cut hair.
So it's not, they haven't just singled out studios. They've said nobody who has clients can work and has clients visit can work from home. Exactly. So it's not like Music City's gone. It's not like Music City's gone, right, well, there are studios shutting left, right, and center because everyone's having home studios. We're going to defend the studios. They haven't done that. It's been a blanket thing.
Exactly. So, and that's a fair question. And that comes up a lot. I think people want to know that. They think, oh, is there some nefarious intention going on here? Are there like the commercial studios trying to shut down home studios? And it's a fair question, but it's not the case. It's just the fact that Nashville had this crazy law that just said, no matter what you do, you can't work from home. So if you're a nice old lady and you just want to teach piano lessons and the kids in the neighborhood come over and take piano lessons from you, you could get a cease and desist letter. If you didn't comply, it could ultimately, you could get fines and jail time. So it was pretty crazy.
Can I just ask if you're just say you're a piano teacher, can you go to someone else's house and teach them?
Yes. So that's the irony, right? And I mean, think about it. And that happens all the time. Like if I hire somebody to cut my lawn, there's nothing wrong with that. But they're making a hell of a lot more noise than I am by recording in a soundproof studio, and it's legal. But if I wanted to, I don't know, if you were going to pay me $25 to come over to my house and watch me cut my own lawn, that would be amazing. So we went through this process, right? And so 2 years going through the court system. Ultimately, we're in a courtroom with a judge, and the judge just looks at it and goes, it wasn't like a trial by jury kind of thing. It was just simply a judge looking at the facts and doing a summary judgment. The judge said, despite all these facts and the fact that you should be allowed to do this and that you have a constitutional right, I'm going to judge in favor of the city and say whatever law the city wants to make, they have a right to make it. So I'm not going to overturn it. And then we appealed that. We put that into an appeal process, which is actually still ongoing. And so we're in the appellate courts. And meanwhile, along comes at the end of 2019, the very beginning of 2020, along comes this new bill in front of the Metro Council that is a home business bill. And one of our council members, Dave Rosenberg, decided he's going to put forward a new bill that's going to allow people to work from home and try and figure out a good way to do it. And so I saw that and I was like, okay, this is what we've been waiting for all along. I need to, we need to put the brakes on everything else and just focus 100% on this. So I made that my mission this year. And in January, actually, I did see you guys at Winter NAMM. Yay for Winter NAMM! Before we all went into big changes in 2020. That was the last big gathering, I think. And so before that happened, I thought, if I'm going to get behind this home business bill and I'm going to, really push to make a change for the entire city, I should probably find out whether people actually want it, right? So what's a good way to do that? And I was like, well, why don't I start a petition? And so I went, Googled, went around, looked at different options for that. I'd never done a petition before. And I settled on a website called change.org, which I think we've probably all seen that come across our social media feeds and stuff. And I wrote up a petition and explained, it basically said, if I can remember the title of it, it said, please help save my home studio and all home studios in Nashville, in Music City. And so then I explained what was going on, and I hit the launch button on a Sunday night, and I went up to go have dinner with my daughter. And 45 minutes later, I was like, I might as well see how it's doing. And I looked at my phone, and it already had 100 signatures on it. I was like, whoa, this thing's like, you know how that is when you make content, that first 100 is like, woo, And so, so that happened, and then it just started taking off, and it essentially went viral, and immediately, within a week or something, it's like 10,000 signatures, 15,000 signatures. By the time it was finished, 7 months later, when we finally finished this thing in July, it had 166,000 signatures on it from around the world. Wow. And we had been able to extract all the ones that are local, because that's, of course, a challenge. Just like if anybody can sign this, how do you know who's right here? And we figured out a good way to do that. We wrote a whole algorithm and put it in a spreadsheet and extracted everybody who was right here in this county. And it was like 5,000 to 6,000 signatures were right here in Nashville saying, hey, we want to be able to work from home. So I had a whole series of going in front of the Metro Council all through 2020 at all these different meetings. It's a long process to change the law here in Nashville, and I think in a lot of places it is. And you really have to build support, and you have to get people to show up, and you have to go speak in front of the council and explain to them, here's why you should vote on it. And so I had to do all these public hearings, and in March was one of the most important ones early on. And I'd already spoken to them, previously trying to rezone and do other things. And so I was feeling a little bit like, well, what do I do? I've already said everything I got to say. What do I say again this time, And so I was like, well, I got this petition. It seems pretty clear what everybody wants. Maybe I should try and distill that down. And then I thought, oh, why don't I write a song for it? So I got together with a great local songwriter, a guy named Tommy Womack, and we co-wrote a song called We Need to Work From Home. And I was able to get people to come out and speak at the public hearing. And I put myself intentionally last. So I was like the closing act, and I got up and I held this huge ream of paper. And I was like, listen, you guys said you wanted to hear from your constituents about whether you should change the law and let people work from home and have home studios and everything. And I said, well, here's 166,000 signatures from around the world. And over 5,000 of these are your people right in Nashville wanting you to do this. And I plunked it down on the podium. And then I sang the whole song. We did this whole sing along with hundreds of people in the peanut gallery behind me. The very funny thing about that too is we got a video of that. Is of all places in the world, you'd think that would have been like a beautiful chorus of voices and perfect timing. There were some really out of tune singers going on, and everybody's clapping on the 1 and the 3.
Oh no!
I can safely say I know exactly what you're talking about because I watched it, because I remember it came up on a YouTube on a Facebook live feed. I seem to remember.
Right.
And I watched it and I thought, at this stage, and obviously by this time we're all starting to think, hang on a sec, we're going to be needing to work from home soon because it was all kicking off with the pandemic.
Exactly. And so the next time so what happened? That was in March. We did that one. That one was actually very challenging to even make the public hearing happen, because every time I needed to get a rally of support, get people to come out and write emails into the council, send letters in, come speak at a public hearing. I mean, it's hard to get people who've never spoken publicly before to get up in front of a microphone and say something. It was very challenging to get people motivated to do and mobilized. So I think that one was on March 5th. On March 3rd, 2 days before that, Nashville gets hit by a tornado.
Oh,
yeah.
Tornado came through. Devastated buildings, took lives and stuff. So, no light matter at all. And meanwhile, it's like 2 days later, I'm supposed to do this thing. And I'm just like, how in the world am I going to get people to say, yeah, sorry about the tornado, but this is important too. We need to make this happen. But, miraculously, we were able to get people motivated to do that. And they came out, and then of course they deliberate over it, and then they say, okay, next meeting, we'll do another meeting later, and we'll do the next thing, and we want another public hearing. Then I'm like, oh, all right, so I got to do this again. So then the next one comes around, and I'm trying to rally everybody for the next public hearing, and all of a sudden we go into the pandemic, and there are no public hearings. There's not even a public metro council, and they don't even know how to do a meeting anymore, and meetings are going online and stuff. So that was a big challenge, but we were able to get that to happen. And we were able to get people to phone in, and they did let some people come in person. I can't remember if that was the next one, but essentially it was just one thing after another. There were these obstacles trying to prevent us from mobilizing and getting in front of the council. But so we did the public hearing. People called in, phoned in. I got up and spoke, and I just said to them, I said exactly what you said. I was like, we all need to work from home, especially now more than ever. And I said, I closed and said, the irony is not lost on us that tonight the majority of the Metro Council is joining this meeting, working from your home office to vote on whether or not tomorrow the rest of us will be allowed to work from our home office. That it was just a question of like taking these obstacles and trying to flip them on their head and turn them into opportunities. I know that was feel good.
That was the moment. I think we all went, he's got it. Absolutely. You nailed it. That was like the proverbial last nail in the coffin for that whole argument. I went, surely surely this is going to work. And then obviously we all got the news that it all happened and it gone through, and it was like, amazing result. Absolutely incredible.
Yeah, thank you, dude. Well, funny enough, it actually didn't go through with that one. You're right. That was the proverbial nail. They moved it to another meeting. And then when the next meeting came up and we had to mobilize a whole public hearing again, this time just before, like a week or two before we're supposed to be in that Metro Council, which is downtown in the courthouse in Nashville, before they're supposed to meet there and we're supposed to be able to speak again, it's the Black Lives Matter movement and the protests. And they literally, the photo that goes around the world is a guy burning the courthouse where we're supposed to meet in 2 weeks, lighting it on fire. So, this happens and it's like destroying the place for us to do it. And the Metro Council meetings now, they would start at 6:00 at night. And because so many people came out to speak about the protest matters, this again, incredibly important topics. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That I'm trying to that's super important. But what about this thing here? We still need to have our own studios. Those meetings, the meeting the week before we were supposed to get in there, they started at 6:00 at night. And when the sun rose the next morning, they still weren't finished with the meeting and hearing the public speak. So we were up against like, how in the world are we ever going to make this thing happen? And so I think we had our meeting and it went, and our bill came up, and it was 4:30 in the morning when our bill came up, and they were going to start talking about it. And one of the opposition members on the Metro Council gets up and goes, I move to adjourn this meeting. And so he adjourns the meeting. He gets the second, and they vote on it, and they adjourn the meeting, and they push us back again. And so finally, July 7th is when they did our final vote on this. And at that one, it was like, all right, enough is enough. And funny enough, our bill came up at 11:00 at night, and they talked about it, deliberated, and voted on it at 1:30 in the morning. And to all of us who'd been going through this, that felt like a huge win. And we were like, man, I can't believe we got out of this so early. That was so sweet. So anyway, sorry, I did my best I could to wrap that up, but that's the whole story, start to finish.
Absolutely amazing. So the one place on earth you would think there wouldn't be a problem with making music, and there's a huge issue. Well, there was a huge issue. I think the whole of the Nashville music scene, and I think, the greater American music scene on the whole, owes you a huge debt. So
thank you.
At some point, glasses will be raised in person. The next time we're allowed to travel, or it's at least vaguely convenient to travel for a show, or the next shows that happen, will be there, and drinks are on us. That's for sure.
I'll definitely be throwing a big party here at Summer NAMM if we're all here next summer for sure.
Great.
I think you just reminded me that's exactly what I need to do.
Well, so we had every intention of coming over for Summer NAMM this year, and I've not been to Nashville. Many and various people have said, you need to come over. It's amazing. We'll put you up. We'll find stuff for you to do, places to see. I said, it's very simple. You can keep me entertained for a week. I want the John McBride tour.
Exactly.
I want the Blackbird tour, and then leave me in the mic locker for a day.
The Blackbird tour is you got to do that. It's so awesome. Now, does your audience know about Blackbird and everything?
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
Yeah. So that I describe the Blackbird tour as like going to Disney World for audio engineers.
Yeah,
it's 11 studios, and it's just a complex of the greatest studios in the world. Just incredible stuff, and an incredible collection of gear, instruments, microphones, everything. And then of course your tour guide is Mark Rubel now, who's he's basically the godfather of recording at this point.
Yeah.
And he just takes you through, and he tells you the stories about the gear, and shows you the stuff. And like some of these microphones, I think, there's just like incredible histories, microphones that have come from, the war podium from World War
Nazi
II.
There was swastikas on them, and
I think there was a microphone with the swastika on it. That came from the Third Reich or whatever. Yeah,
I think there's also the world's only stereo 251 as well. That
Oh, nice.
Apparently John McBride throws at people just to see their face drop. But so Nashville, obviously we know. So I got very close to being invited out to Nashville for a session, but in the end it couldn't happen because of, quite frankly, visas and union regulations. I was living in the wrong country, which made things very awkward. But tell me about another studio that you get out to use occasionally, which is not quite so permanent.
Oh, you must be referring to the Hay Bale studio.
The Hay Bale studio.
Yeah. So rewind 15 years back to this, right when I started my studio here, started the home studio. 2005 was when I started moving down to the garage. I also got the call to, I had done a session with some guys in a studio called Alex the Great here. There was a festival just south of Nashville called the Bonnaroo Festival. And these guys were working in radio, and they were saying, we're going to take different artists and pair them together in the studio, and we're going to have a radio show and call it Radio Bonnaroo. No, I think it was called Hotel Bonnaroo. That was the first one. And we'll get them to cover a song and take that and put it on the radio show. And so I got a call to record, I think it was Gomez and Warren Haynes playing together. And they did a John Lennon cover. Oh my goodness, I'm going to have to think of the title of the song again. But they came in to do a cover, and so we spent all day recording those guys. And at the end of the day, I get invited because I think it was Gomez was doing their show at the Ryman Theater. And so I'm standing backstage of the Ryman, and I'm watching Gomez invite Warren Haynes up, and then they perform the very song that we just spent all day working on in the studio. And that was like this very incredible moment where I was just like, this is pretty cool, you know? So that session went really well. And as the young engineer, I was really hustling to try and make that as excellent as an experience as possible for the band. And the guys who hired me for that, they were also doing working at the Bonnaroo Festival, and they were going down there and creating a whole radio world and a compound and bringing DJs on site and everything. So Bonnaroo is a 4-day music festival just south of Nashville, 150 bands playing or something like that over 4 days, all night long. You know, just like, I mean, I know you guys have the biggest festivals in the world, but but you know, it's that whole idea of just like an incredible event. And so he said, in 2005, after that, a little bit later, he said, you know, hey, if I give you this budget, could you come down and bring up a studio and set it up on site at the festival and like create a temporary studio and then record bands and then we'll put them on the radio? And I was like, let me think about that. Yes. So of course. And so I went down, he said, you know, the festival was coming up in I forgot what it was, a few weeks or something. And I spent time figuring out what we were going to do. And he said, come on down and let's take a look at this. And I go down there, and it's this huge, just like hundreds of acres or something like that of farmland. It's, you know, many square miles of property, and there are roads and there's this infrastructure and everything. And I felt like it was like some kind of military installation where there's telephone poles and wiring going in and dirt roads and, you know, machinery everywhere. And it's this incredible infrastructure they put together for the festival. And then these huge stages that they start building. And he showed me where we were going to be. And he basically said, you know, we're going to put in a double wide trailer and you can build a studio inside there. And then he said, but, you know, it's pretty loud. I mean, the main stages are right there. And these subwoofers were like 300, you know, feet behind the main stage. And he said, but I went by and I saw we got some local farmers here. What do you think about, you think we could use that? And I look over and it's just like bales of hay, you know, stacked up. And I was like, yes, we can use that. So that's how the Hay Bale studio was born. So every year we'd go down and we would buy tons of bales of hay and stack them up like hay bale construction to encase and close in an actual double wide trailer. And then, you know, 2 doors come out of this hay bales and you could walk up the stairs in, and now you're in an air conditioned trailer. And so then our job was to just simply sort of finish out the interior of that and put in soundproofing. And we had a control room and a live room. But the first one that I did, it was just like, we were just sitting there right with the band and a pair of headphones. But essentially we had a mixing console, outboard gear, a mastering desk in the back of the room, and then we'd all put on headphones, and the band's right through the glass in the live room right in front of us. And they're just like your studio, except we didn't even put 4 people out on the porch. We just kept them all, 8 to 10 people right in one room. And they perform live, and I just mix it in real time in headphones while they're performing, mix it through the console. It gets captured at the mastering booth. And then within the hour, he's mastered and uploaded 3 songs, and they're going out to 40 radio markets everywhere.
Very cool.
Yeah, so we did that for 15 years. We do that every summer in June. And in that time, I got to record hundreds of bands and well over 1,000 songs recorded, mixed, mastered, and broadcast. And it was just an incredible experience. It was lots of fun. Have you guys done, live for radio stuff or radio studio recordings?
I did some stuff, a very similar thing where a guy I knew had converted an old 60s Airstream caravan into a studio, and he used to take it to lots of the festivals. So I did the Cambridge Folk Festival once, which, okay, I am not a folkie, but it was some of the best recording I've ever done. Kids turning up with kind of weird, obscure folk instruments saying, can we record? Yes, come in. Where do you put the microphone on that? Wandering around the thing, trying to listen to where it sounds interesting and where it sounds good. I remember doing this kind of kids quartet, acoustic guitar, violin, Cumbrian pipes, Celtic pipes, and a Celtic harp. And I just, put the mics up, get everything set, go.
What are Cambrian pipes?
It's like a bagpipe, like a Scottish Highland bagpipe, but much smaller. So it's a much sweeter sound.
Sweeter. There's nothing sweet about that.
No, but if you,
I love bagpipe sounds. I love them
check
all.
out an artist called Catherine Tickell. Not Catherine Tickle, that's someone different. Catherine Tickell. She is a well-known Cumbrian pipist, and it's beautiful noise. It's beautiful sound. Huh. But I remember just going, I've never recorded these instruments in my life. I remember they had a few sort of select mics. I'd taken a few bits and pieces with me, and I just went, yeah, that'll work. That'll put that there, put that there. And it was beautiful. I've still got the sessions like 10 years later because I went, yeah, this is awesome. Yes, and then we put them out to 2-track, and then they got broadcast from. I think Bob Harris put some of them out on Radio 2. Bob Harris being legendary.
Did you mix it in real time, or did you multi-track it and then mix it afterwards?
It was multi-tracked and then mixed later. But to be honest, the mix was put a bit more reverb on it. It wasn't do anything level-wise because it was, we got it captured right in the first place. The levels to tape were good, and it just sounded great in the box.
So I would always mix it live in the headphones. And one of the other things that I did that really was eye-opening to me is that my mix was also the headphone mix going out to the band. So what I realized is that we were creating sort of a feedback loop. Whatever I was doing was what they were hearing. And so we were informing each other. And it doesn't always work. If somebody gets too loud and there's not so much you can do, but if the balance of all the instrument levels is right, it's a super cool way to make music. It's like, it's a very in the moment thing. And, you could go crazy with the reverb or the delay, and then the artist hears that and they're responding to it. Hopefully they're not just giving you a nasty look through the control room window. I don't know if did you do a runaway delay on the Cambrian pipes at all?
I don't think we were being that. I mean, if you think about an Airstream caravan, it's confined.
Yeah.
I was like this with a screen in front of me, and there's a guy in the pipe player was behind a kind of glass sliding door thing, and then I've got everyone else around me. I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to get too creative with any of this right now. I'm just going to get it down. But I remember the mix was just. I mean, I've used the mix on demo sessions for when I was working with Avid back when, and people said, "Where did you get that?" I said, "Oh, yeah, I've recorded it. Yeah." Not saying where the session came from, but I remember you thinking, "This is just awesome." Beautiful acoustic music.
But you mentioned not doing a lot of folk stuff, and I think that makes sense because I feel like I've seen you do cover videos from your studio, and you're doing more like Chicago covers and stuff like that, right? Wasn't it?
Yeah, I'm an 80s rocker, born 10 years too late, really.
And what about you, Paul? What's your favorite if you were to describe your favorite genres of music, how would you describe it?
Well, I mean, I'm a pop producer, so I mean, I've been sort of producing pop music for, oh my God, for like 15, 20 years, sort of like all over the world. So that's my sort of thing. So more commercial sort of stuff.
You were auto-tuning vocals before there was auto-tune for vocals?
I was auto-tuning vocals when auto-tune used to come on a floppy disk. Do you remember that? And you could even buy the rack version. We had a rack vertion and the floppy version of it.
Do you guys still have a zip drive?
No, I have somewhere actually.
Do you know what? I've still got my Apple Mac G3, and I had the G3 300, which has a zip drive in it.
Oh, that's right, I do too. I've got it upstairs. Yeah. I refuse to throw them away. I threw this. Well, actually, I didn't throw away. I still have the G3, the blue screen that came with the computer. It doesn't work. Yeah, it doesn't work. But I have a downspout on my studio outside, and the dog runs by it, and she'll just like blast through it, and she'll bust it wide open, and then it'll flood my studio. So finally, I had enough, and I just took the old G3 screen. And it is now outside my studio as a huge paperweight, just pressing that downspout up.
Jeez. And Lij, I've got a question for you. And this is obviously going to be related to hay bale. Hay bale, sorry. Is because you did some recording with Adele, and obviously one of the biggest artists in the world and stuff. That was at hay bale, yeah?
Yep. She was amazing. So she came in, and the first thing she said was she was sick. Right. So she was, had a cold, a scratchy throat or something like that. She wasn't sure if she was going to be able to do it. And she had a guitar player with her just playing acoustic, and they did a cover of Chasing Pavements.
Oh yeah.
And it was unreal. Like when she sang, it was just like, this is it. I don't even understand. Like, I don't need EQ and compression. Like when you record somebody who's got an incredible voice, you realize pretty quickly, and this has happened to me a number of times, that sound that you love so much about their voice, it was in their voice.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I just used an SM7 on her, and I did have some compression. I have like a Calrec compressor and a EQ and a mic pre that I used on everybody. In fact, I took the same mic chain down for 15 years of doing that. I even took the same reverb down, so it's you can't quite see it there, but it's a Master Room XL121 spring reverb.
Wow.
I took that every year, and I always use that. So it was like a staple sound that would just be blended in.
Wow.
But Adele was a sweetheart, and she just killed it. And, I was never able to do anything, but I did just for fun. One time I did a little remix of that vocal I did with her, because I love that song. It's so much fun. Yeah. But it's fun to take something like that into Ableton Live and, put it on the grid and then remix it and stuff.
Amazing.
But there were, she was awesome. She was awesome.
So have you got any favorite artists that you recorded at hay bale?
Oh yeah, boy. A highlight for me was actually recording Richard Thompson.
Man.
He came into the studio, and I was always such a fan of his work. And, sorry to bring up folk jams again for you, James.
But the thing is, my musical tastes are very, very broad. I mean, I'd say, my CD collection is CD collection and vinyl collection is everything from, Baroque and classical all the way through to, Tool and ZZ Top and, heavy stuff and everything in between. So it's more that when people say, what do you record? It's like, I'll record anything you put in front of me. I'll work musically. I think I have a pretty good musical understanding of music, full stop. It's just that.
Oh, go ahead.
So if I had the choice, yes, I like working with bands. I like working with guitars and keyboards and drums and bass and things like that. But, if someone came to me with a string trio, string quartet, I do string quartet work quite a lot because I like doing it. There's a very pleasing sound about putting four people in a nice sounding room and pressing record.
So what I was going to say is, question for you guys is, don't you remember that shift where like you start out in recording and you have a favorite style of music, but then you pretty soon realize that it expands because there's the difference between you, the musician, and the wannabe producer versus you, the engineer, who you very quickly begin to have a real appreciation for the craft of recording. And like, it's like, I'll hear somebody who produces hardcore music, and then I listen to that. I'm like, oh, that's really cool how they do the drums that way and the guitars that way. And I want to know how to do that because, like you say, James, sometimes that session will come along and you got an opportunity to do that. And, there's a lot to be said for specializing in something so that you really become a master of your craft. But that love for all the different styles of music and the different ways of recording it, I think that's so key.
I think that's kind of where the Studio Rats came from. The whole concept of it was Paul had spent so much time using programmed drums, and we worked on a project for Universal Audio, and it was with Rooftop Renegades, wasn't it, Paul?
Oh yeah,
yeah. We worked on this project, and Paul and they had written a song, and I said, I'll put drums on it. That could be a real drum track. And all of a sudden we had this idea for radio ready pop, but with real instruments. And that's what the Studio Rats as a band is. It's a trio of guys who work together and play together, most importantly, writing original material. We've done some sad ballads. And we've done some more up-tempo stuff and some heavier stuff, and the track we're kind of working on at the minute is kind of, I won't say it's an ode to U2, but there's definitely some Edge vibe in there.
There's some eighth notes.
There's some eighth note triplet delay.
There's a little delay on the guitar.
Yeah, if I can get it in there.
I saw you two play at Bonnaroo, and I was hoping that they were going to come into the studio. No, I wasn't I didn't really hold my hopes that high for it.
No, not you two. You two.
So I saw them play on stage, and we're talking about three guys, right? So they get up there, huge stage, huge sound system, huge video screen, all this, and they start playing, and it was so cool to watch those guys go through the classic beginning of set evolution. Like the first song kind of made sense. It was like they're settling into whatever. Second song, and then it just clicked, and like it's that settling in between the front of house mixer and the band on stage and everything, where it all just converges. Like you're talking about the beauty of being in the studio with the band. It's like you want to, as the engineer, you just want to capture that moment when everything just comes together, and that energy is like the perfect snapshot, But watching even those guys get up on stage and do that, and then thinking to myself, like, how in the hell are they going to make three people? How are they going to fill this sound of this place? And then all of a sudden it just clicked, and they hit their groove, and the sound guy had hit it, and you had that U2 sound comes out of the main stage speakers, and it was perfect. It was just such a cool thing to witness.
And did you get to record them in the studio?
No, I would have loved to, but when I will say I have to rewind 25 years for that story. So 95 was when I interned, 94, 95 was when I interned at Woodland Studios here in East Nashville. It's a studio that's owned now by David Rawlings and Gillian Welch, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou fame, and other things. And now it's a private studio, but it was a really beautiful functioning movie theater turned studio that did tons of great records in the 70s, 80s, 90s. And while I was there, Daniel Lanois came in to produce Emmylou Harris' Wrecking Ball, that record. And he hired whoever the hell he wanted to hire for the band on that. And so the drummer that they decided to work with was Larry Mullins Jr. from U2.
Wow.
So I got to meet him as he came into the studio. And more importantly, I got to meet sort of the side guys too, because his drum tech was he was super friendly, and he's out in the lobby and he's chatting with me and everything like that. But he, talked about all the stuff he was doing in the session and the way they're setting things up. And it was really cool to meet those guys. And I don't know where it is, but right behind me in the bottom of that rack, I can't point to it. This is like one of those mirror tricks.
It's a backward. Yeah. It's
yeah. At the Science Museum where you have to write your name in reverse in a mirror. But right there at the bottom of that shelf right there, I still have a metal bit of tubing, which is a guitar slide. And it was a little too much of the hi-hat or like one of the crash cymbal stands that Larry Mullins Jr.'s drum tech sawed off to shorten it and build the drum kit for him. And then he let me keep it. So that's my Larry. That's my U2 story in 30 years or less.
So do we have any questions from any of the guys and girls out there in YouTube or Facebook land? If you do, put them in it's that way, isn't it? Put them in the comments.
I got one because obviously you do the Recording Studio RockStars podcast.
Yeah.
Which is one of my favorite podcasts, actually. I mean, I run most days and it's such a long podcast. It's like, it's normally like at least an hour long. So it's, I can go running with it and it's great. Love it.
Isn't your interview coming up soon, Paul?
I'm happy to do it. But I was going to ask and listeners, if you haven't heard this, the music that's on the show is, you obviously do. That's your music, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
And for me, the thing that blew me away was the guitar recordings and the guitar production, because it's so unusual, but it sounds so cool and so unique that I recommend anyone just goes and has a listen to it, because it's really great. So yeah, just talk about that a little bit.
Well, it's all right. So if I thank you for that, and if I go back around 2010, 11, something like that, it was a point at which I sort of thought, you know what, I want to go do some. I wasn't really writing lyrics, but I loved playing, so I thought I want to do some sync music. I want to make tracks with somebody and try that out and see if we can get it into a sync library or something. I just heard about other people doing it. I knew somebody else was doing that, and I thought I wanted to do that. So I got together with the drummer, Corey Siegel, and we just sort of camped out in the studio for a week and would just kind of come in and write a little. I'd play something on guitar and he'd play drums with me, and we'd cook up a little short song. So each song's like 2 minutes and 30 seconds or something. That'd be a long one, And then and then we tracked that stuff and did about 9 songs. And then I kind of put it away, and then I came back later and I was like, I really need to, complete this stuff and keep going. And so I would, whenever I had a chance, I'd come down to the studio and I'd just, dig in to Guitar World and do a bunch of overdubs and put way too much stuff on each song until it was like bloated and sounded like my first experience with a drum machine, where by the time you're finished programming your loop, you've used every single drum pad.
That's what having 5 toms will do to you.
Mate, don't get me into toms.
Yeah, man. I like Tom, but not his drum. So doing like that and everything, and then I finally, when it got through the mix and recorded this stuff, and so it's 9 instrumental songs, and it's all just like whatever I felt like doing. I love rock stuff. I love riff rock, and I really enjoy getting different guitar tones. And then I had this 9 songs. I'm like, well, what am I going to do with it? And I was really proud of it. It just so happens that was the time at which I started getting into podcasting too. And then it sort of clicked, and I was like, oh, I've already got all my own source music for the podcast, so I might as well just use that. And rather than change things up, I thought I'm just going to make this part of the theme, and I'll just stick to this music and just use it everywhere. Nobody's complained about it yet, so I guess I can just keep using it for a while.
It's great. It sounds awesome. I really like it.
Well,
and I really like your
Skadoosh too.
What's that?
The record is called Skadoosh.
That
was what we came up with, and then by the time I released it or by the time I used it in the podcast and had it all finished, and Googled it, to see if I could get the domain name. I'm like, what do you mean Kung Fu Panda says that? Or whatever. So
that's awesome. I love the way that you use, how you use the panning. It's like it's really sort of far edges, and it just sounds great.
Thanks, man. Thanks. Yeah, kind of the hard left, center, right.
Yeah.
Approach to it.
Sounds good. Yeah,
but it's a lot of fun to do. I want to do more. So if you guys ever want to make another one, let's come on over.
Oh yeah.
We're there.
I can't wait for Nashville. Sam's got a question. Sam said, "How has working out influenced your work in the studio?"
How was working out influenced my work in the studio?
How's working out?
Yeah. Thanks. Good question. I would say it influences the work a lot. So one of the things that I think you can see now, if you look around, at the world of studios and you begin to experience, if you start doing it yourself, is, I'm sitting in a chair right now. We're all sitting in chairs. Now put yourself in a chair for 12 hours, 15, 16 hours a day, 5 days, 6 days, 7 days a week. Let's be honest, guys. Studio life. Studio life will suck you in. And a lot of visits to the coffee machine, a lot of visits to, the candy bars and the snacks and things like that. And so you just quickly realize that it's not conducive to being super healthy in its nature, right? Especially, and I think you guys will appreciate this, the difference between when we started out in recording and what it is today. So when we started, other than the fact that you were doing program jumps, Paul, so your experience might be a little different. But when we started, you're getting up out of your chair, you're running around, you're going to mics, you were leaning over a console, you're going back to gear and turning it there. So it was a physical thing, right? But then it evolves into this thing where you're like sitting at a laptop. I don't know if you can see my hands, but I'll have to do jazz hands up here. And you're just like this all day long, clicking on a keyboard and not moving. So it's even worse, Yeah. So I know there's a long answer, but Sam, for me, the balance to that is getting into a routine where you're like, if I'm going to be in the studio all day, I'm going to find a time where I'm running or I'm working out or I'm doing push-ups or whatever it is, and it took me a minute. I think the first thing I did was took on running and just doing push-ups or something like that. But the beauty is if you are in the studio 7 days a week and you do take that on, you could also be exercising 7 days a week, which is pretty good for you.
Yeah.
What about you guys? How important is it to you to have that kind of balance?
Go on. You go first, James. Okay. If it's I have to run every day. So if I don't run every day, I just go mad because it's just you're sat in a room all day long, just just like literally just sat here either with a guitar or doing something, and it's So, I would just wakes me up. Just gives you energy, doesn't it? So
and you said you've been listening to podcasts while you run too.
Yeah. Always just
a great way to do that.
My thing.
Obviously, my method of fitness for many years was gigging 4 or 5 nights a week.
Yeah,
playing drums is a physical thing.
That's it.
Yeah, damn right.
Right.
Yeah. Well, there's been studies done where they've said, drummers playing full out for an hour, they burn the same calories and use the same energy as a professional footballer. Soccer rather than and whether you believe those studies or not, it was great for my ego and for my personal pride. But drumming is a physical thing. It's an energetic, it's an aerobic thing. Now, I don't do 4 or 5 gigs a week anymore because I have children. But certainly they keep me
kind of running around.
Yeah, they keep me fit. That's for sure. I've got 4-year-old twins, so that's enough to keep anyone busy. But my thing is anything to get me outdoors because I'm very aware that being in here, the joke earlier was the studio tan. Even if I go for a walk, I'll walk down to the heath for an hour or so, 45 minutes at lunchtime. Try not to go to the pub halfway and stop for a pit stop. Kind of negates the whole thing. But just to get outside, walk for an hour, not just stroll, but actually properly walk.
Yeah, it's and again, like everybody's experience is different too. So there's no absolutes about what the right way to do it is. It's just a question of balance for each of us. Sam and Marcus is joking. He's like, geez, you guys are making me feel guilty for being lazy, But the truth is, it's like, I think we just have to ask ourselves the question. It's like, if I love recording and making records so much, do I want to be able to do this for a long time?
Yeah.
And for me, the answer is yes. I want to go as long as I can. So that also means other things to consider. Like I had to learn the importance of not having the speakers cranked way up insanely all day long in the studio. Just for power listens.
Yeah, definitely. Andrew's got a good question, and it's something we haven't really talked about a great deal during this one, because quite frankly, there's a lot of stuff that we're not qualified to talk about when it comes down to all things pandemic. But Andrew's asking what he was before I lost it. What's the main type of studio work you're doing with all this COVID thing going on?
Yeah, well, I think that varies for everybody, but obviously with the internet these days, that makes things like mixing remotely for other people much easier. Mastering as well, just because it's so easy to send and return files now. When we were starting, of course, 90s, if you wanted to, you didn't email somebody an MP3 even then. That took a minute before that was even possible. I think Gmail was one of the first times you could do that. And so people still had to be in the room together. So mixing and mastering is great. Collaborating with people over the internet. It's so easy to do a Zoom call, and you could, despite the fact that there can be some challenges to, the latency of a Zoom call, or, you might find yourself faced with, how do I play high quality stereo music from me to you through this video chat? Those can be solved, and solutions are out there. I use a tool called Audio Movers.
Yeah, love that.
Great plugin.
Yeah.
And that one will let me stream something right from the Pro Tools directly wherever I want it to go. So that's a great way to do it.
How Paul produces tracks when I'm playing drums. So I'll have the session open. I'll then be playing along. He'll have Audio Movers into his DAW so he can hear exactly what's going on. And it works brilliantly.
Yeah. Normally comments like James, can you take 10 toms away? He tends to ignore that.
Yeah, they get filtered out.
The answer is no. I can't take 10 toms. Did you ask for 20 toms? But I just wanted to complete that thought too. Is just and who was it that asked that? It was it Eric? Was that it or something? Like that? Andrew. Is just that reminder that things that sound like they would be too challenging, give it a try, because you might be surprised at how easy it is to get into a flow. So a video call, not perfect audio, you might find that you can still make a lot of musical decisions for somebody who's producing. You could play an instrument, have somebody else listen in and comment that they like or don't like something. It's easier rather than harder.
Yeah.
What else?
Go for the next one?
Sophie says, "Evening, gentlemen. Hello, Mr. Shaw. Your client, Ben Harper's guitar sound is so organic. Any special memories or notes from recording him?"
I remember he was cool to have in the studio. He came through very quickly. So I'm trying to remember what he played on that, because, again, having done over 1,000 recordings on those sessions, it's hard to remember all the details of each one. But I believe he was playing acoustic and singing. And I remember he had a great voice. I was very quick. So he was one of those, movers and shakers at the festival. So his managers got him in the door, singing the song, out the door as fast as he can,
Yeah.
But he's awesome. He's done a lot of great work. So I don't have anything particular to remember about the guitar, but I can tell you that for a long time, the way that I recorded those guitars was to just use AKG 451 microphone. At the beginning, I would do an SM7 was the most common vocal mic. So I used an SM7 on Ben's voice. And then I would just use a 451 pencil mic for the guitar and just kind of do the 12th fret thing. And that works pretty well. It doesn't always work. And then I've tried other stuff like one of my favorite sounds for the guitar was using the Roswell Pro Audio Mini K47. I took those down there, and those really gave a very beautiful full sound. And then sometimes I would use the condenser mics like the Roswell Delphos on vocals, which was really incredible. And also the Lewitt LCT 940, if I'm remembering the model number right, the tube mic. That was a great vocal mic. Mm-hmm. So hopefully that's helpful.
Cool. Mike, although he has signed off, he will catch up with this one later. Says, what advice would you tell your younger self, or what advice would you give your younger self?
Oh, man, you had to ask me that question, didn't you? Actually, I think I do know the answer because I've thought about this a bit. Because if you're going to ask, nearly 300 people that question, you better have an answer yourself, too. And we're approaching about episode 300 on the podcast at this point, too. But for me, the answer would be to go back and tell myself to trust myself. So I think that it was very easy for me to have an internal gut trusting barometer for music and stuff that I have an instinct for. I mean, I think I'm good at what I do. But when I started, it was very easy to let that get swept under the rug in face of seeing other people that are successful at what they do and thinking, oh, I should maybe be doing that. Oh, that's probably what I should do. Or maybe this thing that these guys are doing, that's legit. And what I'm doing is just kind of fun, like a hobby. So it took me a long, long time to get to a point of recognizing that, like, as simple as this, like whatever I think and whatever I'm into, that's legit. Like that could be a legit thing for me to do. It could be the most successful thing I ever do. And it could be the best work I ever do. And like, that's the only permission that we need to do things in music, in our, the business side of our music and life and love. I'm still trying to teach myself that advice though. But for me, that was it. I just think that I spent an awfully long time thinking that everybody else was right and that what I thought was probably just, whatever, that's just what I think,
Lij, it has been an absolute pleasure to chat this evening. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us. Thank you out there in Facebook and YouTube land for being with us. It's been a blast. Thank you so much, buddy.
Thanks very much for having me here. Both you guys, James and Paul. It's an honor to be on Studio Rats with you. And, the irony is when we hang up this call, it's not like any of us are going to leave the studio. We're all just going to sit here in the studio. That's what we do because we're Studio Rats. Thanks, everybody, for joining us, too. And thanks for all the great questions and comments. You guys all rock.
Yeah, cheers, guys.
I can't believe that we resisted the temptation to say, Lij Shaw, are you ready to rock?
Oh, we should have done that.
Well, I don't know. At this point, I'm kind of wiped out, guys. That was a long live stream. I don't know if I really need to rock anymore.
Okay, everyone. Well, thanks again for joining us. Thanks to Lij. We will see you again next week. Who we'll have on with us? I don't know. We haven't asked anybody yet.
Hey, everybody, drop a comment and let me know how soon Paul should be on Recording Studio RockStars.
I'll go, and I'll do it whenever you want.
There it is.
I'll see you tomorrow.
But don't you want that social proof too? Here it's coming.
It's coming. All right, everyone. Take care. We'll see you next week.
Cheers, guys.
Everybody.